Well, good morning. Here we are. Thank you very much for joining us today for Addressing Racism in Heritage, an event from the Heritage Trust Network. My name is Sarah Pearce and I'm the Development Officer for Scotland. I'm the only member of staff in Scotland, so if you're a member up here, I'm the person that you work with. I'm funded by the Architectural Heritage Fund, who gets some money from Historic Environment Scotland, as well as National Trust for Scotland. And this event is actually part of our Unlocking the Power of Communities programme of events, for which we get some money from the National Lottery Heritage Fund as well. So lots of funders in there. Thank you all very much to them. And if you play the National Lottery, thank you for doing that. I'm just going to ask my colleague Bev, who's helping me today, just to wave and say hello, turn on her webcam briefly. If you've got any questions for the chat box at all, that'll be Bev who's helping you out there, and she'll get back to you. Maybe not. We'll skip on then. So the Heritage Trust Network. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're the umbrella body for essentially any heritage trust, professional trust, community group who are involved in regenerating a historic building across the UK. We've got 300 members in the UK, 50 of those are in Scotland. Our key focus point is peer-to-peer networking. The whole idea is that essentially any challenge that you're facing, someone else has faced it before and they've got the answer to that. So we want to put you in touch with them so that we can all help each other. But we also have our digital toolkit, which is online. It's the most fantastic digital resource. It's got every stage of a heritage project, everything that you need to know, everything that you want to do within your project from start to finish. And that's there just exclusively for our members. As well as that, we also have our conference every year. We've got events throughout the year, lots of training, lots of networking. So it's a really good thing to be part of. So do join us if you think that sounds like something that would be helpful to you and your community project. Our website's just at the bottom there. This just gives you an idea of some of the events we've got coming up at the moment, particularly part of our National Lottery funded project and also Architectural Heritage Fund. We're doing Open High Streets program at the moment, so you can see all of those events. There's lots coming up and there might be something that suits you. Couple of things to be aware of before we start. So all attendees, you're muted and the webcams are off, so relax, you can drink your cup of tea, we're not watching you. We are being recorded today and we're going to email this out to you afterwards, so if anything crops up, doorbell goes, don't worry, you can catch up later. We will have a feedback form as well as an attendance certificate, so please fill in the feedback form. We need to tell our funders how this was useful, what we could do to improve in the future, all the stuff that you're already aware of. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end. I think often that's really the most valuable bit. What we use is an event Padlet. So again, if you look into the chat box, you're going to see the link there and just click on that. It'll take you straight through to the Padlet. And it's just a web browser where we can post all the questions and things. And the nice thing about Padlet, we know we're discussing a slightly tricky topic today. So you can put your name on that, or you can keep it anonymous. You can ask any question you like and we'll come to that at the end. But if you're not comfortable using Padlet, do just add it into, fire your question to the question box on GoToWebinar and Bev will sort that out for us. We'll get that online. So addressing racism and heritage. Why are we here today? Why are we doing this? I think the fact that you're here means that you've already got a pretty good idea, so that's great. This is a huge issue for us socially. Structural racism is something that needs to be tackled and sorted. Within the heritage sector, we've been aware of this for a few years now. We've had a number of events looking at this from a number of different organisations, but there's still a hell of a lot more that we need to be doing. I think from our perspective at Heritage Trust Network, we want to take that information, that success from other people's projects that we're aware of, and we want to share it with our members, but we want to share it with as many people as possible, which is why we like non-members to come along and join our events as well. I think when it comes to heritage projects, there's two issues that I'm really aware of that relate to this. The first would be, how do we engage with minority ethnic groups? How do we get other people involved in our projects that otherwise we're not reaching? We know they're in our community, want to work with them, want to include them, but we're worried about getting it wrong. We don't know how to do it. How do we make that approach? So that's one angle. And the other is the interpretation and telling the story of your building or your project. So it could be that you've always told the history of your building, but maybe you're only telling it from one perspective, and maybe that's just the white person perspective. So it up and give it from a different viewpoint. Maybe it's also that you know that there's stories there that you're not telling because they're difficult and they're our speakers. So I'm going to ask our speakers just to turn on their webcams now so that we can see them, to get an idea of what they look like. Are they able to do that? Here we are. Right, thanks everybody. So we've got with us today, we've got Dr. Susan O'Connor, who's the Director of the Scottish Civic Trust. We've got Ghazala Khan, who's Deputy Director of the West of Scotland Regional Equality Council. And Neil Bhopal, her colleague, is the Development Officer there, so he's joining us as well. And Sian Loftus, who's an independent heritage consultant, will be sharing one of her projects, and Sharon Dander, who's producer of the Don't Settle project, Beat Freaks, and they're actually based down in Birmingham, so we thought we'd make it a bit more UK-wide. So thanks very much, everybody. You can turn your webcams back off just now. Thank you very much. So we're going to make a start on today's timetable. We're going to start with Susan O'Connor. Susan's just going to tell us about the Make Your Mark volunteering campaign, which is something that we're a part of along with a number of other organisations. It's a really important campaign and hopefully something that you can become part of as well. So I'm just going to make Susan the presenter and then we'll hand over to her.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. As Sarah says, my name is Susan O'Connor and I am from the Scottish Civic Trust, but I also sit on the Heritage in Volunteering Working Group. Hold on just a little second. I need to just get back to the start of this. All right. There we go. Yeah, so I sit on the Heritage Volunteering Working Group, which is part of the Our Place in Time Historic Environment Scotland's policy for heritage. And what we've been working on over the past kind of year is a new campaign called Make Your Mark. So what is Make Your Mark? So it is basically our brainchild. Everybody who sits on the Our Place in Time Working Group for Heritage Volunteering feels quite strongly that there is a real issue with the diversity and inclusion within Scottish heritage. So the campaign is about increasing the numbers of people who are not white and not the usual suspects in heritage volunteering in Scotland. Why do we need it? Well, as Sarah's been saying, there's a real issue with structural inequalities in Scotland, particularly in relation to heritage volunteering, and these are really coming to the fore, particularly with the coronavirus impacting on how people relate to heritage. If you look at the Scottish Household Survey, for example, you'll see that the people who engage with heritage normally are white, male, and of a certain age. It does not reflect the population at large. So within the working group, we are concerned to make the people who get involved with heritage volunteering much more reflective of society at large. And the way we can do that is to encourage people who do community engagement to get more involved with heritage volunteering, because it's a key way to get people to identify more with their built and natural heritage, and indeed the objects in museums as well, and to make them feel that they are their objects as much as anybody else's. So what do we need you to do? This is a very quick presentation. Right. We have two main areas at the moment. One is a pledge letter, which you can get at our website, which is makeyourmark.scot. And at that, what we ask you to do is to sign up to various different policies and projects, which are ways of increasing the diversity of the volunteers who get involved with your projects. Once you get involved with signing up to the Make Your Mark pledge, we can then get you more progressed into getting more heritage volunteers that are of a more diverse makeup through our advertising opportunities. So we can advertise your heritage volunteering opportunities to a much wider audience than you may be able to get to yourself, and perhaps help you in ways to reach new people. We'll be developing the campaign over the course of the next year, and there will be a number of events and a series of ways in which you can get involved to help broaden the scope of what you do. So I hope you will consider getting involved with Make Your Mark. Do have a look at the website. The pledge there gives you a bit more information on how we're looking to get people engaged and the kind of things we would expect you to be doing. And we hope that it's the ideal first stepping stone really into having a more diverse and more inclusive organisation within Heritage. Okay, thank you very much for listening. At the bottom of the screen there, you can just see a range of the people who are involved with Make Your Mark. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch and we will point you in the right direction. Thank you, Sarah.
Great, thank you very much for that, Susan. That was really helpful and really interesting. I think hopefully lots of people will be keen to sign up to that. So let's get going with our main speaker today. This is Ghazala Khan. Ghazala's created a really fantastic presentation for us, and within it there's lots of short videos that they've created on a number of different projects, and then right at the very end she hits you with so much advice and so much information that I think you're going to want to take some notes. But don't worry too much, you are going to receive the recording at the end, so you can always go back and watch it again. So let's watch Ghazala's presentation.
Hello, my name is Ghazala Khan and I'm the Deputy Director of West of Scotland Regional Equality Council, also known as WESREC, and this is my presentation for the Heritage Trust Network. We're standing here today in Napier's Hall Street Centre, also known as WESREC offices, on the 3rd of August 2020, week 19 of the lockdown. Normally this would be a hustling, bustling day with lots of community members, staff, walking in and out of the doors, but it's really quiet today. We haven't been in our offices for over 3 months and all our work is now done online. Because of the lockdown, we have created some of our archive heritage footage to show you examples of some of the delivery that we've done with the heritage sector. West of Scotland Regional Equality Council, also known as WESREC, has been around since 1971. Over the years we've evolved as an organisation and now we are one of 4 large organisations in Scotland in terms of the geographic area that we cover and also the demographic of the communities. We have a vision that is an inclusive society free from discrimination, and a lot of our work supports promoting good relations, reducing inequalities, discrimination, and we're funded through a number of streams to help us support this aim. Our vision is an equal and human-based society where everyone is valued and can take an active role. We're working with communities across all equality strands. We develop and deliver community-led responses to eliminate discrimination and attain rights, remove barriers to build a fair and just society. To give you a context of our work within the heritage sector, about 8 to 10 years ago we realised there was a massive gap within communities accessing heritage services and the sector. Over the years we had delivered small activities showing communities a sense of belonging, how to celebrate diversity. However, we were needing something more and the gap was still quite big. We were successful with a number of grants and some of these included the Historic Environment Scotland, our Roots project for example, which is still running 8 years on, and also the Heritage Lottery Fund as it was known then. How we work with the heritage sector? Well, we make contact with heritage-focused organisations and sites. Through our Roots Scotland project, we now have a database of heritage-focused organisations that we call upon. An example of this is activities we've delivered with the Glasgow Museums Resource Centre and other funding support networks. We build partnerships. An example of this is our work with Scotland's Urban Past, where we ran an 8-week programme improving digital skills, oral histories and research tools. Our project made it into the final exhibition and we were invited to present our project at their launch. Our Roots Scotland project has organised community exhibitions celebrating heritage and its links to Scottish history. For example, we delivered activities that included site visits, workshops on diverse heritage and Scottish history. We provided linguistic support through capacity building, increasing confidence and engaging in stories of past and present. We linked with funders and other community groups through conversation cafes and one-to-ones. And we also built the capacity of small community groups to develop and apply for heritage-focused grants. We also support the needs and understanding of how to engage with communities. We do this by offering cultural and diversity training where needed to the heritage and the wider sectors. We develop activities where we support communities with cultural and linguistic barriers. For example, we opened our building for Glasgow Open Doors Day for the first time in history using volunteers as tour guides. This really brought local communities together. And foremost, we signpost and deliver activities that reduce prejudice and lack of awareness. The video you're about to see was made by Historic Environment Scotland last year. My name is Ghazala Khan and I'm the Deputy Director of West of Scotland Regional Equality Council, also known as WESREC. The strapline itself for the corporate plan resonates with me personally and the work that we do for minority ethnic communities. We see an inclusive society free from discrimination. So the fact that it mentions all and everyone within the corporate plan highlights the fact that we will be working together with HES to try and build the gaps in services between minority ethnic communities accessing the rich historic environment that is Scotland. Our project, Roots Scotland, has been funded through HES for the last 8 years. This has given us an opportunity to work with minority ethnic communities and bring together the communities and the barriers that we currently face in terms of accessing Scotland's historic environment. WESREC work primarily with minority ethnic communities and we're based in the Napier's Hall Street Centre, which is an old school. Last year with Scotland's Urban Past project, we delivered a number of workshops to actually highlight the heritage of this building, and for the first time ever in history, we opened our doors to the wider public for Doors Open Day. The project was extremely successful in bringing back together communities, intercultural dialogue, people that had never accessed history and its service before, and there was a number of capacity building activities that built skills and further interest in people wanting to learn more about Scottish history and its environment. For years, Scotland has celebrated the rich diversity of all cultures, which makes it Scotland today. Scotland's culture is all our cultures. So that video was put on mainstream media, including Twitter, and one of the first comments was, "When is Ghazala going to go back home, where she belongs?" Now that got me thinking for a moment. It was somebody living in America that made that comment, and who were they to actually question where I belong? I don't call Pakistan my home because I was born in Glasgow, Scotland, and for just a moment I did question myself, but not for long. Scotland is my home and my heritage. This experience is not something new. And minority ethnic groups and other equality groups have faced these challenges and disadvantages for a long time in history. To give you an idea of this, what I'd like to do now is show you a series of adverts. Historic, but something to think about. These adverts that you're seeing give us an insight into our past, the inequalities faced on a daily basis, and not even direct discrimination, but marketed for all to see. The result? Damage to the unconscious and conscious bias to everyone that saw them. It belittled equality groups, making them believe that they were inferior and less valuable, putting everyone in one box and not thinking about individuals as human beings, but as assigned characteristics that describe them. Along with us dealing with a pandemic, the last few months have seen the Black Lives Matter movement on the increase. This has been a result of the murder of George Floyd. Globally and throughout media, we now see a lot of people standing up and fighting for their rights of inequalities and the discrimination that they've faced on a daily basis. Equality is equal access to opportunities. Diversity is everyone is different and individual. Inclusion is a sense of belonging, feeling supported and valued. The Stepping Into Diversity project was funded through the National Heritage Lottery Fund. For this project, we recruited 20 volunteers who gathered oral histories and provided guided tours to old buildings that are now purpose-built to become religious institutes. The aim of the project was to invite the wider communities to come through these doors and see how communities lived, celebrated diversity, and actually saw the purpose of these buildings and what they're used for now. Over the years, we have documented some of our project delivery, and I'm about to show you a couple of videos that will actually show some of the activities that we've undertook. Here is a Stepping Into Diversity video from 5 years ago.
If every person in Glasgow told a 5-minute story, we would still be listening in 5 years' time. We would hear stories never twice the same, never once less honest. We would cross continents and find families, long to love and learn to lose. We would invoke injustice, ambush apathy, reignite hope. Hope that the great cacophony of voices might come together and create. From Sauchiehall Street to Garnet Hill, Berkeley Street to Great Western Road, in the space of a few miles live a great number of these stories. Stories, the forgetting of which leaves not the loss of things once done, but the loss of identities once known. For when we forget to remember, we forget a part of who we are, a part of who we could become. We lose the setting of one sun in the rising of another. Awaken then, not only stories, but voices with which to tell them. Voices to reclaim his story and start telling ours.
Awaken, awaken, awaken. Voices to reclaim his story and start telling ours.
When I first came, with the first week when my sister and my mom was here with me, it was absolutely lovely because it's Glasgow is a really lovely city to be.
Awaken.
Oh, Hen, are you from Moscow? In the beginning, it was very difficult. 1963.
We realized we had to leave that country. The difficulty was to get into another country. Nobody really wanted to take me.
The idea of making people welcome, welcoming people to your house, talking to people in the street. Yes, just welcoming people.
Awaken.
I'm a Glaswegian.
That's the one thing which is quite strange. A lot of people feel very Pakistani, but I don't.
So that's how I came to Glasgow. It was by chance.
We have stood up for what we believe in.
Now, not a lot of people know about the Muslim communities and their involvement in World War I. For the centenary, we developed a project that would raise awareness of their involvement, that would also help reduce stereotypes, prejudice and perceptions of the Muslim communities today. This was an extremely sensitive topic given the global views and tensions that Muslim communities face on a daily basis. Islamophobia is real, and it may not be shown on mainstream media. However, we are more aware of localised incidents that take place on a daily basis. This project increased awareness and respect for all those that fought and lost their lives. This video explains a little bit more about the project. Well, I guess the main aim of the project was to actually find out what the Muslim community contribution was to the World War I.
1.5 million Indian soldiers were involved in the First World War. Of that number, 400,000 were of a Muslim faith.
At least 89,000 Muslims died fighting for Britain during the First World War, and I feel it's important that this is known by society because this is part of our shared history.
We mostly concentrated on Indian stories because that's the kind of information that we found, although there was a lot of discussion around on other missing communities such as the Middle Eastern.
African nations or African subcontinent that actually made a lot of sacrifices.
I became interested in this project because I know nothing about the First World War and especially nothing about the Muslim community during the First World War.
I think it's important that our generation learn from the old generations and to understand where we fit in society and where we fit in history.
I did do history when I was in high school, but I did do the World War I, but we didn't learn any part of the Muslim population side of it. It gives me a bigger picture of what actually happened in the war.
I come from a former colony, Nigeria, to see the similarities between India and Nigeria and the relationship to the kind of these Commonwealth relationships. It's interesting to find out how many Muslim soldiers fought in the First World War, and especially when you see films that don't include their narratives and their stories as well. So,
what is the implications of that?
The stuff is left out.
Yeah.
So there's gaps.
Exactly, we don't know what is left out.
I think it's really important that their stories are also included in the bigger narrative about the war.
Went home to get recruits. Everything was very quiet at home. Everyone's thoughts are always with their soldier sons across the sea.
And they were in ceaseless anxiety. May the God of mercy soon grant peace and health in all the world.
Even though it was very, very difficult conditions, Muslim soldiers did try to keep the fast.
The writer consoled the soldier with an optimistic idea that perseverance shall be rewarded in the form of pride and glory.
They found a different world of the war, and after that they wrote the different words about the war. This is
I want to apply my research skills into the projects to research on the Muslim communities and how perception of the Muslim communities have changed from the past to present.
It's very, very important, especially in this day and age of quite negative press for the Muslim community at large.
Talking about how negative a particular newspaper can be and how people can view negativity in the world from one particular newspaper that they choose to read. So with that, we need to open our eyes.
after doing this particular project, I think it's very important that we carry this on and take on less information that's all available in relation to other faith groups, in particular countries that were, or subcontinents within the colonial past.
There are a lot of things that I didn't know before this, and since the first session, it has enlightened a lot in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's fine.
So these videos and images that you've seen has made it look really easy to access communities and deliver activities with them, but let me tell you, it is not. Glasgow alone has 114 languages, and that showcases that language is still one of the biggest barriers to accessing mainstream services. Other barriers include a lack of knowledge and awareness of the activities that are happening. Many people feel that this isn't for me. It could be large heritage sites, there could be entrance fees, socioeconomic disadvantages and poverty may stop people accessing some of these sites. Most marketing is now online and using social media tools. A lot of our communities that we work with have lack of literacy in IT and also maybe tablets and smartphones. This results in them not accessing this information. Well, you may be asking what you can do as an organisation. Well, for a start, think about putting equality at the forefront of your agenda. Think about your board, your strategic groups, your corporate plan, and see how you can make equalities a mainstream service that you offer. You may also want to develop a toolkit to make sure that you're taking everyone into consideration. You want to develop your activities in a way that involves others. And for this, you might want to take up partnerships and external links with community groups to help you access some of the communities and the barriers that they face. That brings me on very nicely to what you can do for external engagement. You can build partnerships at grassroots level. You can work with community groups like us and others in your area. You can arrange your marketing to be fed to all communities by passing activities and projects onto your partners to help them develop them. You can build your diversity by engaging with the local community champions, volunteers who can get the word out for you and help you diversify your service. You can attend local events, activities, gatherings, social hubs to engage with communities that you aren't targeting at the moment. You could apply for partnership or consortium funding where you deliver and minority ethnic groups provide the linguistic support and the venues that make people comfortable in the communities that you're targeting. Going forward, given the current circumstances with the pandemic, it might be an idea that you have a look at your equality diversity in the following ways. Think about setting up a steering group involving people from all ages and backgrounds. Think about online sessions to try and get the community groups together, some focus group to find out what they want and what they need. You may also want to think about risk management within your organisation and raise awareness of your staff force with some equality and diversity training. To give you some examples of how you can embed inequalities into your day-to-day working is have a look at your recruitment. Make sure that there's no unconscious bias there. When you're shortlisting applications, remove all the details from the application so that the individual that is doing the interview or the shortlisting doesn't know who that is. You may also have your board at capacity at the moment, but you might want to think about setting up a steering group with young people, old people, people with disabilities, people from minority ethnic backgrounds. And the reason for this is that you'll be getting a voice from all. They might not be part of your board, but they'll help you forward with your strategic thinking. Whether it's with your staff or with your communities or your service users, it's really important to recognise the diversity around you. What you can do is celebrate key events, festivals, and put these online or pass on awareness of them through your staff, your community members, online on social media. This helps people feel that you're thinking about them and that they're valued and respected for their cultures and their beliefs.
That was great. Well, thank you very much to Ghazala for sharing that with us. I think to take away. I know the first time I watched that, I thought I couldn't keep up with taking down all the notes that I wanted to. I think for me, one of the things that really stood out was the heritage walkers. I just thought the idea of taking a group of people and getting to visit all the different kind of houses of religious faith within a community, to get to be able to see inside those buildings, meet those people, the insight into different cultures that you would then have the greater understanding would just be fantastic. And I think we could probably all do that. And as well as that, you know, World War I project, most of us could create a project that related to that towards our building or to so any questions that you have for Ghazala, anything onto her project, do either if you're in a small rural community and you don't have that many minority ethnic communities nearby, this is a great way to show how can you interpret the history, how can you grow the understanding within your community amongst, say, a predominantly white area. So we'll show that one now.
In 2019, the community of Birse in Aberdeenshire began a year-long project exploring the links between their community and chattel slavery in the Caribbean. The project was developed and managed by me on behalf of Birse Community Trust. I also engaged in the project as a member of the community, as a volunteer researcher, and as a parent of a child in the village school. This is a story of our project, of how we went about developing it, what we discovered, how we shared our learning, and where we go from here.
Birse Community Trust represents the people of the civil parish of Birse in Deeside. The parish is home to around 750 people spread across 125 square kilometres. There are 3 main settlements and the largely uninhabited forest of Birse, which covers more than a quarter of the parish. The trust was formed in 1999 to manage on behalf of the community the extensive ancient rights of property owners on an area of ground known as the Commonty. The principal source of income for the trust is 2 large commercial forests acquired with support from the Scottish Land Fund. Alongside the natural heritage assets, the trust owns and manages 12 built heritage sites across the parish, including 3 Category A listed industrial buildings, a B listed kirk and the old school. It also maintains an archive of objects, documents and photographs, which is housed at the old school site. The It Was Aberdeen project evolved from research into the history of the local school, Fingen Primary. The school buildings were, in 2018, the subject of an options appraisal report. An assessment of the significance of the site led to a revisiting of research undertaken in the 1980s and early 90s by a local researcher, Robin Callender. Robin's research revealed that the school had been endowed by a former resident of the parish, the Reverend Gilbert Ramsay. Ramsay had moved to Antigua and from there to Barbados in the 1690s, where he remained until shortly before his death in 1728. Though Robin had published his research, revealing that Ramsay had made his fortune in the slave trade, in 2018 few people in the community knew about this. Robin had also published extracts of letters from Jamaica to Birse in the early 1800s from Francis Ramsay, no relation of Gilbert's. Francis was the son of a local farmer, but had benefited from a Gilbert Ramsay bursary at Marischal College, Aberdeen, which was the other major beneficiary of Gilbert Ramsay's will. The letters revealed that Francis bought a small property in Jamaica, which he called Birse, after his home in Scotland, and that he had children in Jamaica, the eldest of whom, aged 10 at the time, accompanied him on a trip to Scotland in 1824. What wasn't revealed in Francis' letters home, and came to light more recently, was that his children were born to a mixed heritage free woman, and that he owned enslaved people. Francis' 1836 slavery compensation claim is revealed in the research published by University College London in their Slavery Legacies database. The idea of developing a separate project, not on the future of the old school, but on the slavery links in the parish, was cemented at the Resourcing Scotland's Heritage Conference in Edinburgh in April 2018. Alan Bissett presented the keynote speech, in which he flagged a 2007 leaflet and pop-up exhibition by the Glasgow Building Preservation Trust and the Glasgow Anti-Racist Alliance, produced for Doors Open Day. It Wisne Us was later expanded into a publication written by Stephen Mullen and published by the Royal Incorporation of Architects in Scotland.
When Alan spoke about the links between Glasgow and slavery, the parallels with our small community came to mind. My response to It Wisne Us was, it was Arbody. If it was Birse, if it was Finghan Primary School, then it reached across all of.
We knew from what little research had been done already that our community's links spanned the full period of chattel slavery in the British Caribbean. And we knew that through the School and Poor Fund, the profits from slavery had reached the poorest in our community as well as the wealthiest. If we could research and better understand our community links with slavery and share that with other people, then our story would illustrate the reach of the slavery legacy right across Scottish society. We also knew that the legacy was still felt today, not just in the continuity of the school, but also in payments from the Poor Fund which were being made into the 1960s. There may be people alive in our community today who received funds which owed their origin to the sale of enslaved people in Barbados in 1728. As unlikely as it at first seems, our small community is a microcosm of Scotland's slavery story. Birse Community Trust identified the potential of the project and approached the primary school and the local secondary school. A heritage group of interested volunteers was formed under the auspices of the Trust to further support the development of the project. We established a relationship with the University of Aberdeen, which was formed by the merger of Marischal and King's Colleges. The university was the other North East institution to benefit from Gilbert Ramsay's will. We worked with university staff in special collections. We sought the advice and input of students in the African Caribbean Society, and we engaged a PhD candidate as our academic mentor. And we rather tentatively reached out to Sir Geoff Palmer very early on in the project, aware of his advocacy work in the teaching of slavery history in Scottish schools. His reply was so encouraging, and it began a close working relationship between the Trust and Sir Geoff. It also introduced us to a partner school in Jamaica, Sir Geoff's own former primary school in Kingston, which was established at the time of abolition to educate formerly enslaved children. The development of the project came at a time when a handful of institutions, notably Glasgow University, were reviewing the origins of their funds, assessing the value of slavery-related funds received, and looking at ways to atone. The value of the legacies, from the Reverend Gilbert Ramsay to our school, the local Poor Fund, Marshall College, and other individuals and institutions in the UK and the Caribbean, was already quantified. The will was clear, though the fate of some funds remains in question. Of greater interest at the outset of the project was just how deep the legacy of slavery runs through our community over the centuries. It was important to us that our project centred on community-led research, that the community would be supported and enabled to research the slavery legacy and to share those stories with others. It was important that we engaged young people, both at the school founded by Ramsay's legacy and the local secondary school. When the project started, Fingen Primary had just 42 pupils across 3 classes, making it possible to run the project as a whole school topic. This presented challenges in developing age-appropriate materials for children as young as 4 years old, but we felt it was important that everyone had the opportunity to engage in the project. And it was important that we shared our learning in innovative and creative ways. One of the primary teachers suggested we develop a national resource for primary pupils. We had found few resources on chattel slavery aimed at primary-aged children, and none focusing on the Scottish experience. The discovery of a graphic novel by Magic Torch Comics, which told a difficult story in a sensitive way, convinced us that this format could engage young people with their heritage. We needed money. We applied to the National Lottery Heritage Fund and the local authority, and the project began early in 2019. We broke down our activities into 3 broad audiences: the primary pupils, the secondary pupils, and the wider community. The community research group would undertake most of the research to inform the school's activities. All 3 groups would contribute in different ways to the graphic novel and site interpretation, and to capture everyone's experiences and learning, we proposed creating a commemorative plaque. The establishment of a heritage or research group had 2 main objectives: to investigate the community's links with slavery and to develop the skills to enable the group to continue after the project. BCT maintains an archive on behalf of the community, but awareness of it has dropped in recent years. Through the I project, the community has learnt new skills, which will enable members to take a more active role in managing access to the archive in future. A committed group of about a dozen people came forward at the start of the project. They ranged from people in their 20s through to their 80s and included a PhD candidate, farmers, professionals, and retirees. We engaged a genealogist and researcher to develop training workshops. Although based in the Central Belt, Alec Wood has family links with our community and is a distant cousin to Francis Ramsay, who owned the Burse plantation in Jamaica in the early 19th century. Research was carried out online, in local libraries and archives, and in national archives in Edinburgh. The group met weekly. Communication outside the meetings was mainly electronic, with research and records shared on a common drive. We also contracted an interpretation writer and a designer to help the group create interpretive panels. Joe Anthony ran a workshop on writing for interpretation. Liz Clark worked with the group remotely on the designs. The result is a pair of panels to be installed on a community path that connects the school with the only shop in the parish, and 3 pop-up panels, all written and co-designed by people in our community. These pop-ups were to be displayed in local libraries and the university library during 2020, though COVID-19 has put this on hold. The findings of our research group fed directly into activities with the other key audiences of school pupils. Fingham Primary School occupies a 1960s building beside the earlier 18th century school building. Known previously as the Bankhead School or the Ramsay Endowed School, Fingham Primary School exists because of the 1728 legacy from Gilbert Ramsay endowing a free school to the parish. By the late 19th century, the endowment had dropped in value because of an interpretation of Ramsay's will which saw the legacies fixed at 1728 values. But the school was by then the largest and most central of the 5 schools in the parish. By the 1990s, it was the only school in the parish. The challenges of age-appropriate learning resources were overcome by developing project-specific material for the younger class. This included lesson plans and worksheets looking at past pupils, from Francis Ramsay, the slave owner and father of mixed heritage children in Jamaica, to people within the community that the children know today, looking at the history and development of the old school site, and exploring traditional and modern building materials and Caribbean culture. The middle class focused on the slave trade history, while the older class considered issues of human rights and equality today. Pupils enjoyed field trips. The 2 older classes travelled to the University of Aberdeen, where they were hosted by the curators in special collections and our academic mentor, Matthew Lee. The university holds material from key Northeast abolitionists, and the day offered pupils the chance to learn more about the campaigns for abolition and eventual emancipation. They saw one of the portraits of Ramsay owned by the university, and the Powis Gates, which were built with slavery compensation money and are decorated with the carved profiles of former slaves. The younger class spent the day at the site of one of the other parish schools, the Forest of Birse School, about 9 miles from Fingham. The volunteer researchers had identified that Francis Ramsay's son Thomas attended this school when he visited from Jamaica in 1824. Having studied Jamaican culture, pupils were able to imagine how young Thomas might have felt, uprooted from Jamaica to live in the Forest of Birse. They played in the garden of the house where Thomas lived with his uncle, who was the teacher there. They measured trees, identifying 2 that were there in Thomas's day, and explored the site of the former school. Another whole school activity was a visit from Sir Geoff Palmer, who met each class to discuss their learning and answered their many questions. His visit had a huge impact on the pupils, with his stories and thoughts being quoted in discussions long after his visit. Sir Geoff also visited the local secondary school, Aboyne Academy. The academy was more challenging to work with than the primary school, with less flexibility in lesson content and working across subjects. We worked with 2 year groups, one studying slavery history and the other diversity. As with the primary school audience, Sir Geoff's talk had an enormous impact on many of the academy pupils. He spoke not only on the history of chattel slavery, but also on how its legacy is felt today, something that chimed with the diversity fair that was held at the academy as part of the project. One of the more high-profile things to come from the project was the production of a graphic novel written and illustrated by Magic Torch Comics. Paul and Vary from Magic Torch delivered 2 days of workshops in the primary school, designing and writing comics and developing ideas for the book. Paul chose the character of Scotia to narrate the book, reflecting on past wrongs, and to interweave an Anansi tale which the children already knew. Vary's beautifully detailed illustrations captured emotions and details for which we had no factual evidence, but could be hinted at through images. Research findings are summarised at the end of the book, and the result is a publication we're very proud of. It was launched in Fingham by Sir Geoff Palmer at the start of Black History Month 2019, followed by an evening lecture which drew a wide audience. Copies of the book were sent to every local authority school and library throughout Aberdeenshire. In early 2020, it was made available free online. What did we learn about the history of our community and links with the Caribbean slave trade? While our links are in many ways stories repeated across the country, Gilbert Ramsay's story is remarkable for the level of wealth given to charitable causes. His legacies to the parish of Birse and Marshall College could have been worth anything from £2 million to a staggering £200 million in today's money. They were interest-bearing legacies, interpreted to mean that the legacies were capped at 1728 values, though the fate of the capital remains a mystery. A Bible given by Ramsay to the parish in his lifetime was found in the community archive and was identified as a rare vinegar Bible, so called because of a misprint in the parable of the vineyard. The book was printed in Oxford in 1717 and was a lavish production, affordable only by the very wealthy. Because of its rarity and value, it's now in the care of Aberdeen City and Shire archives, while environmental conditions in the old school are addressed through a conservation project. And on the evening of the book launch, when the Heritage Group gathered to reflect on their experience of the project, one member revealed research that raises more questions about the origins of Ramsay's wealth. Initially, it seemed his money was acquired through marriage, but there's a suggestion now of family, if not business links, with the director of the Royal Africa Company, the one company controlling the import of enslaved people into Barbados during Ramsay's lifetime. It was the Royal Africa Company which bought the infamous Bunce Island slaving port. We identified more than 180 recipients of Ramsay bursaries at Marshall College, later the University of Aberdeen. They illustrate the breadth of influence and power that bursary winners had across the British Empire, with firstly the Caribbean and then the East India Company being well represented. Many were from our community, and we were able to trace the path they took from Birse to prominent positions throughout the empire, aided by bursaries funded by slave trade profits. The final activity in our project is the unveiling of a plaque at the school, commemorating the enslaved men, women and children sold to fund the establishment of the school, acknowledging the links between our community and chattel slavery, and celebrating new friendships and understanding that have come out of the I project. The plaque is made up of individual clay tiles, each created by someone in our community in response to the project. Ceramicist Hilary Duncan led the activity and has arranged the tiles into two panels, one for Fingon and the other for our partner school in Jamaica. The unveiling has been delayed by COVID-19, but it is hoped it can happen in autumn 2020. While this is the final formal activity under the lottery-funded project, it doesn't mark the end of the subject for our community. Our pupils will continue to collaborate with the youth of West Kingston, Jamaica, through the links with North Street School, with the goal of creating opportunities for greater social mobility through education. Our school has raised funds for North Street's Needy Pupils Fund, and we look forward to closer communications between pupils and a sharing of cultures. And we hope that the opportunity might arise for our volunteer researchers to explore Ramsay's Royal Africa Company links through collaboration with the University of Aberdeen. The university will be undertaking a report into its own links with slavery and has expressed interest in the I project model of community-led research and learning about local slave trade links in the city and shire. Across the region are truths waiting to be told. The legacy of slavery runs deep in our society and it reaches to the present. If the collective response to Scotland's role in slavery has largely been "it wasna us," then our community's history leads us to a response of "aye, it was abody."
Well, thank you very much to Sian Loftus for putting together that presentation for us. I know it was a member of her community who also did the narration, which was very slick and very professional. That was great to have. I think it was brilliant to see so many of the kind of the original resources and archive material there that you've obviously shared throughout your project, and was information that your volunteers managed to find and dig up. So that was so interesting. I really liked that you had the young people at school. You may not have seen it. One of the worksheets that the children had filled in was looking at a time when I felt different, why it's okay to be different, and what was difficult about that. And what a great thing to be getting young people in your community to be thinking about. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a little coffee break. We'll be back in 5 minutes. So 1:15, if you could come back then, ready to go. And then we've got one more presentation from Sharon Dander before we move on to our Q&A session. So we'll see you in 5. Okay, so we're ready to go again. I'm going to keep my video off now and just focus on sound and sharing my screen. We're having a couple of Wi-Fi difficulties, so if we've been dropping out at any point, apologies for that. But hopefully you're getting all the videos in full because they're being streamed centrally from GoToWebinar. We're going to move on now to Sharon Dander's presentation. Sharon works for an organisation called Beat Freaks based down in Birmingham. We've worked with them for the last few years. We had them presenting at our conference down in Birmingham a few years ago, which was looking at diversity and all the spectrums that includes. They're particularly fantastic at working with young people from a diverse range of backgrounds, and Sharon's presentation now is going to focus on a historic building that's a really typical heritage site museum type building. So that might apply to a number of projects that you're working with. So let's watch this video now.
Hello, I'm Sharon Dander, the producer of the Beat Freaks project Don't Settle. We are a 3-year project currently coming up to the end of our 2nd year. We're funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund as part of the wider Kick the Dust scheme. So, Kick the Dust funded 12 projects across the UK to challenge heritage organisations to improve their youth engagement and just generally their relationships with young people, actively inviting young people to kick the dust off heritage. All of the other projects within this are really fantastic as well, and you should go and check those out because they focus on a specific thing. So Beat Freaks' response to Kick the Dust was Don't Settle. Our focus is people of colour. So this was for 2 reasons. Both of the reasons are kind of Beat Freaks responding to a need that they identified. Firstly, there was a project called At What Cost at Warwick Castle, and that explored connections between Warwick Castle and the transatlantic slave trade, specifically the gardens. The need that was identified here was that communities of colour wanted heritage organisations to kind of acknowledge and confront the difficult histories and the connections to the slave trade and just the impacts that colonialism had on their community and had on their heritage and even their home countries. At the same time, we ran a project called Roots to Roots, which highlighted that British young people of colour in Birmingham were questioning their own identities. They were questioning what that British term actually meant. They were questioning kind of the differences in generation and migration. They were questioning their own place here. So bringing both of those 2 things together, Don't Settle empowers 16 to 25-year-old people of colour from Birmingham and the Black Country to change the voice of heritage through arts, research and governance. Our partners are Birmingham Museums Trust, Birmingham City University, Chance Heritage Trust and Roundhouse Birmingham. Birmingham and the Black Country, obviously where Beat Freaks are based, but also it has a huge kind of migration history. It has loads of different cultures living here today, so it was a very relevant conversation. We are driven by 3 core values that we translate into our approaches, so I'll just briefly go through those. Firstly, cultural institutions are where people go to learn about the past. They go to learn about our past. They observe how society has progressed, and they actually give people a space to reflect on that society today. However, the histories and narratives presented in these institutions aren't necessarily inclusive of people of colour. They tell a very narrow, single, predominantly white and usually quite celebratory story, especially of colonialism. This is really clear in Birmingham as well, and it reached a point where I think a young person said that you can stand in a museum and you can look at the things, but when you look out the window, it isn't matching up. We believe that inclusivity should actually be applied as an attitude and an approach at all levels of organisations, as opposed to just a policy, so that the work becomes more sustainable. Secondly, we centre young people of colour, both as audience, but also the ones making the decisions as well. So their involvement in all decision making and platforms to share their stories is what we advocate for. However, it goes beyond just having them involved, and that's why we actually use the phrasing "we centre them." It's about really giving autonomy to that young person of colour, as opposed to just saying that we're working with them on a project. And then thirdly, that brings me in quite nicely, in order to truly give autonomy and achieve change together, we believe that co-design and co-production as processes and methods are needed. So we ensure that we co-design and co-produce at as many levels as possible. That can include between us and the partners, that can include between the partners and the young people, between all of us, and as much as possible with the communities that we want to engage, with the young people that we want to engage, and kind of mass levels of co-production, or very, very specific ones with a purpose in that room. How are we putting all of this into practice though? So the specific example that I'm going to go a bit in depth is Soho House. We worked a lot with them last year. Soho House is a heritage house located in Handsworth. It is one of Birmingham Museums Trust's heritage sites, and it used to be the home of one of Birmingham's sort of key figures and industrialist, Matthew Bolton. He was a manufacturer and an engineer, and he's most known for his work with James Watt and inventing the steam engine. Sorry, there's no smooth way to take a sip of water and pause for that. So we decided that we wanted to have quite a hyper-local focus on Soho House as one of the house's aims for the next few years was to grow its relationship with its local community, and it wanted to actually encourage more local visitation. So from research that BMT conducted, they found that a lot of the local community hadn't actually visited the house, even though it was basically right on their doorstep. And they didn't even, most of them actually didn't even know of its existence. Handsworth is in the top 10 of the most deprived areas in Birmingham. Its population is made up of 88% minority ethnicities, which was obviously the phrasing used in the census, and it has a large black community, large Indian community, and quite a large Pakistani community as well. Knowing this was really key, so just knowing about Handsworth and knowing about who we're talking to was really key, but I'll come back on that point a bit later. So what do we do there? The way our project is structured is that we kind of have 4 different strands of, say, interrogation into the sector. So we have the governance side of things, which is really challenging the power structures and challenging the decision making in the sector. And what our young people do is that they sort of co-design new youth engagement structures with Soho House. Again, I'll talk about that. I just wanted to briefly mention it. The curator side of things is looking at more audience-facing relationships. So what narratives are you actually putting out there? What stories are you actually telling? Who are they reaching and who are they relevant for? And actually getting young people of colour to be the ones to change or add to those narratives. So we did some of that work there as well. We had Lunar Campfire events, which are open discussion events that allow young people to kind of talk about all of the things mentioned in the project. So talking about their experiences, talking about being a person of colour, talking about colonialism, talking about heritage's role in that, talking about their understanding of heritage. So the idea is to kind of widen perspectives and just learn from each other. And we really centred the idea that you have experience, therefore you have expertise. So we also did some of those at Soho House. And then obviously research is kind of something that underpins and ties all of that together. So for the curator programme, we created opportunities for our young people to interrogate the narratives presented in cultural institutions and to be the ones to design, create, implement wider and more inclusive narratives. We were really lucky to have gotten the chance for one of our groups to actually take on the whole reinterpretation project for Soho House, and one of the other groups worked on an all-day event that was part of a wider Birmingham City Festival. We co-designed the briefs of both of those projects with BMT. This was really, really important in terms of BMT representing what would be plausible, them identifying what the challenges would be or what challenges they do have in their organisation, obviously matching up timelines and logistics, but then also us really advocating for the kind of change that we wanted to aim for with the project, but also on behalf of young people. Once the curators were in place, however, they continued those conversations just directly with the partners, with our support, but essentially they began to co-design the project with the partner instead of us. So I'll talk about the festival piece first. It was called The Audacity of Bolton, and I'll mention it first because it kind of informed the other project. So the brief for this was to create a piece that communicated an alternative narrative at Soho House, and it would have a contemporary relevance in discourse today, but obviously find a creative way of doing that to be part of a creative festival. It's very broad. The young people themselves were a bit wide-eyed when they first started that, but it actually left them open to sort of develop critical thinking in themes, start connecting things together because it's quite open, and actually at the same time just research Soho House quite openly and be open to what routes they could go down. Through research and loads of visits and kind of analysis and talking to the staff, they found that they were taken by the actual physical material that was in the house. So naturally, a heritage house owned by quite a rich industrialist, it was full of quite a lot of exquisite objects. what really stood out for them was mahogany, the way the kind of story of sugar and tea was presented in the house as well. They were really inquisitive about the journey of these things from pure raw material all the way through to when they become an object in this house. In particular, they made a lot of connections to the slave trade, and they really wanted to highlight this narrative because the house predominantly presented Bolton as an industrialist that should be celebrated for his achievements and talked about for his role as an abolitionist. They questioned what being an abolitionist actually meant if he was still then benefiting from the material that came from a system that he was supposedly opposing. The house was only accessible by tour, so they chose to create a period performance piece in the house that acts as a tour. They ran 7 throughout the day, I think, and they were led by an actor playing Matthew Bolton. So Bolton takes you around the house. He's trying to convince you as an audience member to sign a contract that you would invest in his steam engine. So he's quite positive, he's quite celebratory, and that was deliberately reflective of the narrative that is actually told in Soho House. As you go around the house, though, there are other actors playing maids and servants, and also some additional sound pieces that kind of talk over Bolton. And he kind of freezes in the room, and then you hear kind of the implication of what that particular journey of the object had, or where it came from, or the implication of his steam engine, all of that. So at the end, you're actually asked, with a fuller story, if you would still put your name on a list or if you would still invest for this steam engine. The actors themselves are all local young people. They put a call out for it, and they found that familiar faces really proved well in bringing in local audiences, so they already started to form some connections between the community and Soho House. At the same time, in the outside area, the group put up, otherwise known as a garden, the group put up stalls and activities that were aimed to create contemporary discourse, but also appeal to local family groups. So they highlighted the increased social awareness and debate of ethics when it comes to our materials today, and the kind of the recent, well, not recent, but recent meaning sort of the last decade's consciousness on material, especially in relation to ethical makeup, recycling, and fashion. On a washing line, they had clothing with facts and figures, kind of highlighting some of the key ethical issues in the fashion industry. They created that themselves. They particularly related it to the countries that were relevant in terms of like where migration patterns had come from in Handsworth. They also hired an artist to run a physical activity that converted Tetra Paks, which aren't recyclable, to actually these beautiful purses and wallets. This was really, really popular amongst family groups, so they were trying to cater for actually learning what kind of social and leisure time people in Handsworth actually enjoyed spending. They also hired a local black artist to create homemade beauty face scrubs, and it kind of came with a recipe as well. So our curator group was made up of quite a mix of ethnicities, and they talked about the fact that normally when they go places, white skin is often dominated in terms of white skin is often what's considered, so things are catered for that skin type, and it's often irrelevant for their own skin types. So what was really nice that visitors to this event stated that it was really refreshing to see the use of kind of ingredients that they recognised, or that, you know, they'd say like, oh, my mom always tried to get me to use this. And it was really good for the community to see that Soho House was recognising how, you know, something as small as how different cultures treat their skin. The other group were in charge of a reinterpretation of the house with a project called Reimagining Soho House. They were really inspired by the festival piece, particularly the use of local connections, the decisions of local artists, and the interrogation into material. They were having a lot of conversation and identifying that a lot of the issue for the disconnect between the house and its community, the biggest one for them was that they felt the house didn't really acknowledge its place in Handsworth, or even a place of belonging in Handsworth. They wanted the house to feel like it's of Handsworth and not just in Handsworth. So they conducted a lot of... Sorry, that was an alert. They conducted a lot of community consultation first in order to let what they learned about the local community kind of be in their minds while they made decisions and drive the project. The core theme that centred their interpretation was innovation. This was for many reasons. The house itself innovated in terms of its purpose to remain relevant and of use for its community, such as being a police dormitory, a home, a vicarage, and right now it was in another state of its evolution. Matthew Bolton's work and inventions kind of centred on innovation in terms of business and the way it advanced his industry. Soho House, where the road is actually situated, is known to be full of local innovation, so loads of new businesses. It's a cultural hub in terms of like clothing stores and food. Like even I grew up going to Soho Road for kind of Indian food or like Indian clothing. I'm just going to go through some of the key changes, but particularly how they kind of weaved community in that. So the music room in Soho House, they added different music styles in there from sort of a lot of the same places that the local community was made up of. They put examples of different records and key figures. There's a new interpretation panel and how the kind of changing music scene in Handsworth was influenced by culture and migration. The audio piece plays an interview they conducted with Basil Gabidon, who's from Steel Pulse, which is a roots reggae band from Handsworth. They added a timeline into the house that actually acknowledges the house had changed in terms of what it did and what it was there for. This kind of relaxed the fact that Soho House felt it needed to be directed towards Matthew Bolton. It was actually okay for the house to adapt moving forward because it had always adapted. They had a new artist commission, so textiles played quite a large role in Handsworth, and this came from the stories of local people in Handsworth. They found that textiles was a big thing in Soho Road. So they commissioned a local South Asian textiles artist to create 2 new tapestries that hang as you enter the house. So the first thing people saw was the community and the community focus. In the kitchen, they've included local recipes. They've got a book there that people can continue to add so the community feel like they're part of a conversation. There's spices that are relevant to kind of the foods that you can find along Soho Road. There's generally new reinterpretation panels in the whole house, and they were taken by the concept of repeated marginalisation of groups, especially women as well. So Anne Bolton, who is Matthew Bolton's daughter, doesn't actually have a portrait, and she isn't really seen as a central focus. So they actually wanted to put a local community call out for nominations of local businesswomen. The community voted on them, and then 3 women were kind of selected, interviewed and photographed by another Birmingham black artist, and their portraits and interview audio pieces about their business and kind of their journey actually are displayed in Anne Bolton's room. This created a really, really nice relationship between businesswomen in the 3 businesswomen in the house. So one of the women has a catering company, and she's actually catered for events at the house. She catered for the launch event we did. Another is a spoken word and performance artist, so she's actually performed at events at the house as well now. And again, bringing it back to that familiar face, they brought in a lot of their known audience as well, and this kind of community trust started to build. And the group also wrote an additional tour themselves, and that is permanently in Soho House's programming. So it's delivered by the staff. They train the volunteers and staff. You can go to that every Wednesday. Overall, Soho House had an increase of 58% people of colour visitors from the previous year, and some people from the local community actually became familiar faces at some of the events, which is really lovely. In terms of the limitations, I'd say because of lack of time and resources, the group really wanted to do something with translation. So language, there were obviously a lot of different languages, and they weren't able to create a strategy around how you would translate or how would you be even more accessible. So I think that's one thing they would have liked to work on. They also formed quite strong connections with local businesses, but they really wish they could have developed those a little bit more and actually formed quite deeper connections. And they wish they kind of conducted more in-depth community consultation, so always made sure they were going back to the community. I think that could have been a little bit more implemented. This does bring me back to what I was saying before in terms of truly knowing your community and sort of knowing different community behaviours, because it proved especially useful as knowledge when we designed further events and further things at Soho House. Usually I dislike the generalisation and term behaviours, but what I mean is sort of going beyond and much deeper than knowing who your community are and who you're aiming to engage, because they are more than just a demographic. So it's actually knowing things that you wouldn't normally assume. So, you know, what people like to do, what is different in different cultures, what are other people's kind of normal, what references do different people know and respond to and get, what languages do people speak, and therefore catering for that, what issues are important to the community that you're trying to engage, and so on. Knowing and actually understanding that means you can design an account for it. You know, when growing a new garden, you need to kind of get to know as much as possible to create the best environment for that plant that you're nurturing. People will also know if they weren't considered when you were deciding on target audience or when you were making decisions. Designing a welcoming environment kind of goes beyond creating a space that is nice and polite. It's actually about showing that the people you want to engage have been considered at every step of the process, and people can often tell. So involving those communities as part of your pre-processes as well. It can actually result in very simple adjustments sometimes, but again, it's the care that you put in to think beyond what your own normal is. For example, learning that some communities, I just remember one of the Soho House staff members said that he didn't know that some communities don't really do like shared food portions, so instead like buffets and stuff, some people don't like sharing. You're not supposed to kind of share off the same plate and stuff, so it was making sure that people were kind of not double dipping and that kind of option of food. Understanding that when you say an event is vegetarian, that actually egg for some communities and cultures is still considered meat. As simple as that, it just shows that you've taken a step beyond kind of what you know. We continue to run some sort of more successful events at Soho House. So the Lunar Campfires, they kind of grew as well, and they ended up being almost intergenerational. Like I said, they start to be familiar faces, but it also showed that the house was really just giving up its space and its building, and it was a safe place. And heritage organisations often have quite safe buildings. It was quite a safe space for people to come and share different perspectives, and obviously Soho House was part of that. So in itself, in that innovation, it was kind of being part of offering a new perspective on what it is allowing and what it isn't. And then other little decisions that kind of were affected were just things like considering the timing of your event, considering other people's religious holidays and cultural holidays, responding directly to the community, actually truly giving space over to the community without feeling like there's a want for a return. So although the staff were learning from these discussions, although they were forming relationships with their community, that space really was just for the community to come and talk. And then naturally, familiar faces and people should like tell their friends, people come back during the day, they realise that they can come and meet in the day as a group. So it's really just about building that sort of step by step. I'm going to cap it there because I think I'm hitting 20 minutes, but I know there's some question time at the end, so if there's anything you want me to dig into a little bit deeper, I can do. I just wanted to mention in terms of governance, our young people co-designed kind of a board to sit at Soho House to be made of local young people from Handsworth, making decisions about the direction of Handsworth, more strategic decisions, and ensuring that the community was kind of kept as a key goal, but kind of not a goal because it's not something that's just going to be achieved, but as a key approach all the way through, and kind of protecting that. And obviously these are young people that are just passionate about their area, so it's showing that Handsworth is kind of consulting continuously, but beyond consulting, it's actually bringing young people into its governance as well. If you want to ask me some questions on that, because I've run out of time, just ask at the end. But thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you so much to Sharon for putting that together for us. So interesting. I really love the idea of thinking of it as like a garden, in that if you want people to thrive, you need to create the environment for them that makes them happy and comfortable, and you need to find out what that is in order to create your project. So again, so much there, particularly about centering young people to co-design and co-produce the project. You know, don't just create it and then at the end say, oh, do you like this? You need to actually get them in there from the beginning. So another fantastic example of a community heritage project. Just so that you know, if you look into your little control panel on the side, there's a handout there which has got the speaker's contact details. So I will have them on a slide at the end, but I suspect you probably won't have enough time to actually note down people's websites and email addresses. So do download that and get in touch and follow up with anything that they can help you with. I'm sure they'd be happy to. We're now going to move to our question and answer session. We've got just over 20 minutes until 12 o'clock. So I'm going to ask all the speakers to now turn on their webcams and join us so that you can see them. I'm going to keep my webcam off just so that I've got enough Wi-Fi so that you've got my sound. So yeah, if we can get all our speakers here. There's some really interesting chat going on in the Padlet, so thank you to everybody who's been taking part in that Q&A. That's so helpful. Have we got Sian as well? I'm sure Sian will be joining us. But let's make a start. And actually what's really lovely is that I'm seeing lots of people are asking questions, and then others are helping to answer already and are actually offering support and advice. So that's exactly why we exist as a network, to allow people to help each other, which is great. So let's have a look at some of these questions. Lots of positive feedback as well. So I'm trying to pick one that isn't mine. Slavery legacy. Let's have a look at this one. Giving an alternative story of slavery to give the different perspectives rather than ignoring this part of history feels like a positive approach. But how do you get past the anger that a lot of people feel because they're descended from slaves and still suffer inequality? Oh, my screen's just jumped. If people feel too angry to engage, this must be a massive obstacle to forming the interpretation and reaching the audiences. Now, do any of our speakers feel happy to answer that one? Who'd like to come in on that? It's a tricky one. I know we've got some tricky questions here.
I could answer perhaps from the perspective of the I project.
That would be great. Yes, please, Sean.
Sorry, there's a grinder going. I'm just outside my door, so apologies for any noise in the background. In terms of our project, we sought to engage with different groups and different people quite early on as we developed the project, and then as we moved through the project as well, so that it was developed not solely from the perspective of people in our community, but actually some of the key groups outside as well that we were seeking to engage with very early on. So it wasn't a case of, yes, we did have a great many people looking at editing the interpretation, and it was our graphic novel, but very early on, before we got to that stage, we were engaging with people seeking advice, seeking their opinions, and asking how we might form the project and engage with them through that way as well. So start early.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, do come in.
Can you see me, by the way? Because I know my webcam wasn't working. Okay, cool.
Yes,
I just want to say as well, yeah, like not engaging them really early on, and also just being quite open that you acknowledge that there's going to be a range of different emotions and reactions from people. Because if you're coming across it as we're doing great work by just acknowledging these stories, you're again just missing the mark of we haven't fully taken the time to step out of our own understanding and understand that people can have different reactions. So creating space for that, and a word that really, like a lot of our young people really connected with, was unapologetically giving space to people, so that people don't feel like, even when they're kind of venting or talking about their opinions and experiences on how kind of slavery or the history and the legacies of all of that has affected people today, you should still be able to vent unapologetically and not feel like you're blaming.
Yeah,
so that's quite a good word.
Great, thank you for that, Sharon. That's something I was going to say is, yeah, it's the acknowledging part of it, and actually being angry is okay. It's understandable. It's part of it, and that's okay. And I think you can bring that to these projects and air it there until we reach a stage where people are feeling more comfortable. So there's a question here about terminology. BAME has been used regularly by local authorities, TV news readers, etc., and also seen BIPOC and non-white used. All of these terms seem to create the feeling of otherness with regard to these communities. How can those of us working in the heritage sector better describe the diverse communities we're working with? And how do we really need to describe those communities? Do we need to really describe them and pigeonhole them anyway? So it's a question about terminology, and I know I've seen quite a few things on this. A lot of people don't like the term BAME, and that, yeah, creates otherness. Maybe Anil or Ghazala, could you come in on that, regional equality?
Do you want me to come in, Anil? Yeah, you can add something on afterwards. Well, as a regional equality council, we've always used diverse minority ethnic. BAME is a term that I think is used a lot more in England, and yes, the media and certain sectors do use it. Previously, I worked for an employment organisation that worked with minority ethnic communities, and they called it BME. So I think it's really what the organisation and who you're working for and what they're used to describing it. Personally, I prefer the term minority ethnic and using the term diverse, because that doesn't that is all inclusive. You could have somebody coming over from Ireland that's white that decides that I am a minority here. Therefore, we would class them as part of the diverse communities that make Scotland. So we personally tend to use that term. Having said that, we tend to also use terms that are funders because they're very diverse. So we tend to sort of, if a funding application says how you're going to interact with being communities, then we will use that terminology just to show that we can fit into that and what they're requesting. So Anil, I don't know if you want to add to that. You also have the Scottish Refugee Council hat on today.
Yeah, echoing what Ghazala says, I think both organisations, whether it's with WESREC or the Scottish Refugee Council, minority ethnic is the term that we do tend to use. I think it's still important for charities and the public sector at large to recognise that there's still a need to differentiate between the different minority ethnic communities, as the South Asian community will have different experiences and different needs to that of the African community living in the UK. So whilst a blanket term is obviously required in the nature of work that we do, there still has to be that sensitivity to individual communities' needs.
Great, thank you for that. And I think it's being open to being told that you haven't got it right. And actually that's not okay. We prefer if we use a different term, and being open to that, that's okay. We can get things wrong and we can learn and do it better going forwards. So thanks for that, guys. I know there's been some really long discussions, particularly around publishing historic research, and I'm just going to kind of summarize. When doing research into historic stories of people throughout history, minority ethnic backgrounds, we've got someone here who's really concerned about publishing their research because of extreme sensitivity around white researchers writing up history of different groups and getting it wrong, and particularly concerned about kind of their professional representation and that reputation, that being kind of marked, as it were. So Sian, were you happy to comment on this about research and how to present it? You're a white person researching, say, Black history. How do you not offend?
Can you hear me now? So, yes, I suppose in terms of Birse and Fingen, one of the least deprived parts of Scotland, and lacks diversity, to be honest. It's very, very white. How do we tell the story? I suppose we told the story principally through, if we look at the graphic novel, there was a decision very early on to seek professional advice in terms of academic support as to how we tell those stories, and where the research is at the moment, to be sure that we were, meshing with that, and that support was invaluable. You won't see the term slaves or hear people in our community. We talk about slaves generally, it's enslaved people. So there are just little bits of this language like that that Matthew was able to bring in. We also, I think, through Paul Bristow at Magic Torch Comics, very early on we thought that the story of the 10-year-old boy who came to our community for a while and then went back to Jamaica was someone that the children could relate to. But we decided very early on, and Paul, in fact, decided very early on, not to tell any stories through his eyes, because we didn't really know a great deal perhaps about how he felt, and that it probably wasn't our place to speak on his behalf. So the book is narrated by Scotia, and it's Scotland looking back and reflecting on past wrongs. And he also interweaves it. I suppose the morality tale in the book is an Anansi tale that's woven through that story as well. So those Anansi tales are West African folklore. So he's brought that in as well, but we haven't sought to tell the story through enslaved people. But in terms of academic research, you know, I think it'd be a shame if people felt they couldn't publish on those grounds. It's how you interpret and the language you use, I suppose, to tell those stories now. But it's important that those stories are told.
Great. Thank you. I think, yeah, it's a really interesting point that you make, that obviously you don't want to just make stuff up. You don't know what, say, that child's experiences were at that time, and you don't want to just create a story, but seeking help and advice from those who potentially know more about it, and also those who might be offended parties by what you're potentially going to write. That might be a good way about it. Does anybody else want to comment on that with any advice?
Yeah, Sarah, so I mean, as someone from a BME background who works with minority ethnic people through Refugee Council and WESREC, I found this quite interesting. I mean, personally, I believe that if people have the right intentions, genuine concern, knowledge and expertise in a particular issue, I can see no reason why that person can't discuss the history of others or pursue this as a means of research. Within our own organisation at WESREC, we have a white Scottish male who, in partnership with Gazala, regularly delivers equality and diversity training which focuses on matters of race. And we've also had previous members, staff and volunteers deliver various projects on the history of migration and diverse heritage, which were showcased in the earlier video presentation. As well as that, one of the most prominent books referenced on the topic of racism in Scotland was led by a white Scottish academic, and many of our partner organisations, including the Coalition for Racial Equality and Rights, CRER, regularly provide training sessions which touch upon issues of race, empire, slavery and colonialism, delivered by white Scottish colleagues. So, I mean, whilst I believe that there should be a strong sense of cultural sensitivity and understanding when exploring the history of minority ethnic people living in the UK, I don't believe it should hinder anyone from exploring this as an area of research. And in my opinion, the Black Lives Matter movement would echo this, as much of the narrative in the aftermath of George Floyd's death was focused not just on what people of colour can do to eradicate racism, but what can be done by our white allies as well to root out this problem. So it's a shame that people feel that they're at risk of being chastised for talking about these issues. And I think at WESREC, we would definitely encourage people to become more involved, and I'm sure Gazala would echo what I'm saying as well.
Absolutely, and I think in recent months, with these unprecedented times, I think the Black Lives Matter has hit social media and mainstream media on an extremely large level, and I can totally understand people's fear now of maybe saying the wrong thing. But if you just rewind back to maybe 3-4 months ago when this hadn't happened, and think about how you would have maybe spoke to communities without having that fear in place. So mainstream media does have a lot to do with how people approach subjects, and at grassroots level you'll find Anil, myself, anybody from these communities are actually quite happy to sit down and have that story discussed and give our feelings, you know, like a human library, to ask us the questions. We won't be offended. But I think it is a lot to do with what's being portrayed right now, that people actually feel that, you know, I'm now scared to do this in case I go down the wrong path. But that's not really the case.
Great, thank you so much for that both. That was a really, really helpful answer. And I can see also that a number of our attendees have also responded to those posts with advice and actually offering help as well. So thank you very much to the people who've offered help. And yeah, clearly the person who's asked that question can go to WESREC and have that discussion and maybe put forward your research. I think what you're saying there, Gazala, particularly about social media, is a really key point. Is you know, how terrifying is Twitter now as a place to put out an opinion of you or your research, because there are always going to be people who are offended and don't like it. It just feels like a much scarier, risky place, and I can see why that then builds anxiety about doing it at all. But we do need to share the information, and as Neil said, work as white allies. So here's another one. Do you have any advice about diversifying your... Sorry. Yep.
Sorry, Sarah. I think Sharon had her hand up at one point. I don't know if she wanted to just
I can't see the speakers as well. Yes, just shout at me. Go on,
okay.
Sharon.
Right.
No, it's fine. I just was wondering if you moved it along for the time. I just wanted to say we have quite a large group of cohort of young people made up predominantly of people of colour, and they actually share people that have done research and stuff. So from a perspective of knowing what discussions, especially young people, have about it and settling some of that anxiety, a lot of it does come from what was said by the speakers in terms of bringing together language and intention. So the uncomfortability for a lot of them reading it comes from knowing that the intention is just to kind of to mention it, as opposed to actually dedicate time into an impact that would want to come from that research. Whereas some people, you can tell when research is done in a way that's like, we've kind of got to acknowledge the BME experience. And then the other kind of frustration that comes for a lot of them that we've witnessed is when people try and frame experiences as their own. And it's very clear that that's being done as opposed to acknowledging your own gaps in your experience and your own gaps in what you do and don't know, but you're presenting kind of different arguments. And emotive language as well, it can feel very, because a lot of these issues matter a lot to a lot of these young people, and they actually inherently make up how they navigate their kind of day-to-day life. You can tell when research is kind of just done from the purpose of this is one thing, and then it's just kind of acknowledging it as a statistic, whereas if you actually talk about it from a more emotive perspective of the real impact it has on individuals, they themselves kind of respond to that a lot better, regardless of who's put that research out there.
Great, thank you. That's some really interesting points, I think. Yeah, emotive language and not passing something off as your own experience. I know some of the comments that have been made was saying, actually, bring in someone from a different background to yours and get them to comment and maybe feature and be a partner or a writer in the research so that you've got differing perspectives. It's still your research. You're still number one writer, but they are part of it too, and you're able to give different perspectives there. That's really helpful. So yeah, do you have any advice about diversifying your board? I think this comes up quite a lot, particularly in the heritage sector. I've certainly been aware of it, but it seems to be difficult to actually get it done. So this is from an art skier based in Govan Hill, Glasgow, working to restore a cinema. Any thoughts on that? Who'd like to come in?
Okay, if there's no takers. I think it's really about building your connections with a lot of the minority ethnic community-led groups that are in the area. It could be that you put out your recruitment through local places of worship, community groups, and let people know that you are looking to diversify your board. Other things that you could do is bring on, if your board is at full capacity, you could bring on observers or community champions that sort of sit alongside or as a subgroup, and they could also support maybe at a different level as a subcommittee, support the way that your board is working. Providing equality and cultural diversity training for your board would be another way to sort of highlight how to recruit and bring other people into your organisation to try and make it more inclusive.
Great. Thank you very much. And one point that I should have mentioned earlier is that there are obviously regional equality councils all over Scotland, as well as there being an equality council for the UK. So I imagine there's links to kind of training, or there are people that you can approach there for training for your organisation. I can see we've got a question for you, Sharon. Emma Griffiths has asked, she's intrigued about the concept of the lunar campfires. Can you quickly revisit and explain participants' timings and how it worked?
Yeah, sure. So the lunar campfires I mentioned is about heritage physical spaces and about actually providing a physical space for your local community. And it's also kind of trying to create that unapologetic welcome space that I talked about in terms of allowing people to explore different perspectives, but also learn from different perspectives as well. Like Anil mentioned earlier, like a South Asian person experience is going to be very different experience like a young Black experience. So what we do is we have young people of colour called Lunar residents. They attend workshops with myself, and we kind of go through the motions of discussing those things ourselves, informing ourselves at this point, exposing ourselves to different things, whether it's through creativity, art, documentaries, TV, all of that, and kind of picking apart those things and sharing different and trying to just explore, so really just leave space to explore all different opinions that could be had around those things. And then they essentially plan key topics that they want to talk about. So the first one we did was about language. It was about this concept of labeling and where terms come from and how much weight language can actually carry for people, and how phrases like coconut and Oreo exist in different cultures and stuff like that, and what that actually, the impact those have. The residents kind of creatively design these events, but they design them more as experiences as well as just an event. And they kind of allow for different kind of learning styles. So although there's a group discussion, there's other stuff going on at the same time, so that people don't have to engage in a group discussion. They can still one-on-one share their thoughts. There's spaces for them to kind of share privately, and that's just a release experience for them, as opposed to just constantly feeling like they're having to give their information and experience over. And then that kind of discussion, wherever that discussion went, so that discussion ended up talking about light-skinned and dark-skinned privilege, and then the residents take that conversation. It's been like visually recorded. We had an illustrator and stuff. They then come back for workshops with me, and they plan those. They plan that next event, which is actually informed by the first event. So the next one was about colorism within POC communities, and then it, like, in terms of the branding and all of the stuff, because we know we're aiming provocative. The title's provocative, so we set the tone straight away. The event was called Too Dark for the Gram, Too Light for the Culture, and they talked about colorism, and then that event kind of goes into the same pattern, forms the next one, and we actually get the residents to kind of facilitate the conversation, but it's very much becomes a space that the participants lead the discussion and conversation, and we're just there to kind of make sure that everyone's sharing, but everyone feels safe enough to ask questions that they elsewhere would feel like they're going to get ostracized for, or it's actually a space for you to go, I know I'm uncomfortable with this. I can't really articulate why that's a problem. Like, can anyone else? And it's very set up like a helpful space to learn. And then dependent on changing audiences, we did one for the sector, which was specifically about the barriers that young people of colour face in the workplace. Particularly obviously with your age as well, just firstly that's a whole barrier in itself, but like in interviews, code switching, changing your kind of persona, not feeling like the job is advertised towards you but still going for it, feeling like you're in a diversity tick box, and that again just became very like respected in terms of understanding that questions that people might have might come across as though they're offensive, but it really is the purpose of that space first is to learn and share knowledge, and that's why people felt comfortable enough to kind of ask those questions. And a lot of young people told us that you could tell the event was designed by young people, because a lot of the considerations put in place made them feel comfortable. But obviously I can talk more about that if you want to shoot me an email or something.
Those just sound fantastic and so engaging. Really interesting. So thank you for answering that so thoroughly. So I'm conscious of time. We've reached 12 o'clock, which was the plan to end there. So I'm just going to go through a couple more things before we're done. So contact details there, and there is the handout document, as I said. Thank you so much to all of our speakers today. I think I just thought the presentations were fantastic. Q&A session was really helpful too. I wish we had an hour to do it and to go through the questions. What we'll try to do is I can download all the questions, particularly that haven't been answered, and send them out to our speakers and just ask that they put in some notes, and we can send that out when we send out the recording. So hopefully if your question hasn't been answered now, then it will be, and we'll get it to you. So don't worry too much about that, and you will also have the recording of today, so in case you missed anything, then we'll make sure that does get covered. So thank you very much to our speakers, and you can turn your webcams off just now. You'll be free. Thank you very much. So yeah, once again, we've got a whole stream of events coming up. There's always membership with HTN if you think more of this would be just what your organisation needs, and do take a look at the Make Your Mark website. thank you very much to our sponsors, Architectural Heritage Fund, with support from Historic Environment Scotland, National Trust for Scotland, and the Heritage Lottery Fund. Thank you to lottery players. You will be getting your feedback form. I will be sending that to you. So please do fill that out. Always makes a difference. It's always important. So thank you very much for taking part, and we'll see you again soon, another event for HTN. Bye for now.